Hockey records are funny, and they've been funny for a while in that there was a generation there in which everybody scored, and they scored a ton, and they scored in a way that still hasn't really been rivaled since then. So when that changed, when that script flipped, and boy did it ever flip, to the near disappearance of scoring from the sport, the general thought, and I mean for the longest time, like close to a quarter of a century, was that there were records that would never, ever be broken. Nice to be wrong on that one. Good morning to you. Good Thursday morning. I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports. This is Daily Shot of Penguins. It comes your way bright and early every weekday. If you're into football and or baseball, I also offer daily shots of Steelers and Pirates in the same place that you found this. The Penguins are in St. Louis. They'll play the Blues tonight. The Blues have won 10, count them, 10 in a row. You talk about a team that nobody was taking seriously out west, and suddenly, like, they're going to be somebody's really rough ride in the first round by all indications, even though they'll almost certainly be a wild card. Anyway, obviously a good challenge for the club and the rookies and everything else going into that atmosphere. Last night in Raleigh, Alexander Ovechkin scored his 892nd goal, and he scored it exactly the way you gotta be hoping that he gets 895, the record setter. He was parked on the left side, 5-on-3. You can just picture it in your head. I don't even need to finish the sentence, but that's how it went in. Boom. From distance, too, a little further out than usual. One of the terms you're going to hear a lot in the coming days is unthinkable, or that it was a mark that was thought to be unbreakable. And that's because it actually was. In fact, almost all of Wayne Gretzky's scoring records, believe you me, he still holds most of them, came in the most ideal of settings. That's not a shot at Wayne. I've certainly taken my shots in the past, but he's the one who still holds almost every record. He's the one who still has more assists than anybody else has points. And a lot of that was because of a convergence of blessings. He showed up in the NHL out of the WHA at exactly the right time when hockey was about to erupt offensively, before goaltenders had built up their equipment, before goaltenders had gotten the butterfly into motion, and most importantly, right as the Oilers themselves were building up this entire Hall of Fame wing of talent that just could not be stopped. And this was from right as he entered. He went from Indianapolis Racer to Edmonton Oiler, and the Oilers, just like that, started getting all of their Mark Messier, Yari Curry, Paul Coffey. The list is endless. Glenn Anderson, if I list all their Hall of Famers. And so they scored, and so he scored, and it all happened in incredible bunches. So when Gretzky did pass Gordie Howe, that was seen really as just a matter of time. That was not going to be anything that surprised anybody. Gordie Howe got his 800-plus goals just by hanging around forever. And he was good. I'm not being a jerk here. I mean, he wasn't some epic talent that would bring you out of your seat or anything. He was just a big, strong, tough hockey guy who was around forever. So by the time Gretzky's done and he gets his 894, you're thinking, yeah, I mean, nobody's going to get that. In large part because hockey just was virtually destroyed by the New Jersey Devils in conjunction with Gary Bettman thinking it was okay. The Devils under Jacques Lemaire brought in backward skating, the neutral zone trap, the variations of the trap. The Devils won 3 cups. The goaltending got both better and bigger, meaning their equipment got way bigger, and you started seeing teams win with these ballooned creations in net, lest we forget J.S. Giguère in Anaheim winning for the Ducks with an apparatus that was bigger than the pond itself. So the league goes through its various labor issues. It misses significant time on the ice. It skips a Stanley Cup. And one of the things that everybody agreed on when they came back was, we have to change this. We have to have a more open form of the sport. They decided to crack down on hooking, interference, holding, slashing eventually, cross-checking, maybe someday. There were all kinds of elements that were added, including enforcement of the size of goaltending equipment. And it was all so beautifully and probably to some extent accidentally timed with the arrival of Ovechkin and Sidney Crosby. By the time Sid the Kid took off here and the Penguins started adding to his supporting cast immediately, the Capitals were doing much the same, not with the same results, but with the same attempt in Washington around Ovechkin. And they scored. And they scored right from the beginning, both of them. They're very different players, obviously, and very different production outputs for the same reason. Sid was always going to be the more complete guy. He was going to have the higher assist total, even though he's a pretty good passer and doesn't get appreciated enough in that regard. But the numbers came. And the numbers, incredibly, where both are concerned, continue to come. And for me, as someone who has been covering the Penguins since 1997, which was some of the worst of the Devils era, to see the sport come full circle, not just in the average number of goals per game, which are at a really high level right now. They're not what they were in the 80s. They can't be what they were in the 80s just because of the goaltending. But the game is fast. The game is fun. The game feels fresh whenever the younger players are coming in and trying Trevor Zegras-like things or Connor Bedard-like things or Jack Hughes-like things. Actually, the one kid I really need to throw into that pile on a regular basis is Macklin Celebrini in San Jose. And then, of course, not to bypass him, but Connor McDavid arrives as the quote-unquote next one. I don't think he's ever going to be a Sid or an Ovi, but he is who he is unto himself. But most importantly, and this is why I'm talking about this with you today, when Ovi gets that goal, it's going to be a triumph for that generation of Ovi and Sid and Gino. Don't leave Gino out. Of those guys who came in and said, we're bringing the scoring back to the league. We're going to be the ones who get people to fall in love with this game again after all the labor stuff, after what the Devils did. And I got to tell you, I love that. I really love that. When we come back, J1Q. This episode is brought to you by Bet Online, your number one source for all your summer sports needs this season, from Major League Baseball, golf, NHL, NBA playoffs. Get the latest odds and lines, including all team matchups, player props, odds on just about everything that's out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Bet Online, where the game starts. Today's J1Q comes from Reg, who says, DK, one of the four absolute treat talents as a Penguins fan for me to watch so closely has been Evgeni Malkin. It went from Mario to Jaromir to Sid and Gino. I live in the hockey hotbed of rural Manitoba, a few hours from your favorite city, Winnipeg, but I've been an avid Penguins fan since June of 1984 with the drafting of Mario. The Pittsburgh fan base has been truly blessed now for over 40 years after a very rough first 17 years of the franchise. Listen, give Gino 2 top young wingers, and I think he'll be rejuvenated. He's always been a very unselfish team-first guy. A couple more years left in the tank for him, I hope. What do you say? I again, like yesterday, Reg, I don't have any expectation for what Gino will do once his contract is up. I don't have any expectation for what the team will do once his contract is up. And as much as I love hearing from anybody in or around Winnipeg, I'm going to push back at least a little bit on one thing that you said, and I'm sure you didn't mean it in a negative way here, but you say, I think he will be rejuvenated. I mean, watch him. The way he has played in the second half of this season especially, but really throughout, he's been committed. He's been a more responsible player. You're not seeing those games where you go, oh, God, what's wrong with Gino? Never mind a 2 or 3 week stretch of that, as we've seen in the past, even when he's been peak Gino. That hasn't been in play. And I thought it was pretty telling, and I did ask him about this at one point, that post Four Nations, when he and, of course, Alexander Ovechkin and all of the Russians were rightly, meaning from the country standpoint, left out of that tournament, he came back flying. I mean, he looked fresh, and I don't know, if you're rejuvenated, why is it that you can't be juvenated? It's one of those weird words. You only use it when there's a re, but what's an actual juvenation? When does that happen? Anyway, he's been juvenated is what I'm saying. He doesn't need to be rejuvenated. I've liked his game as a second line center across the board. Now, why have I continued to refer to him as a second line center? I do it a lot. It's certainly not to denigrate him or to suggest that he's been demoted in any regard, because he's been a second line center his whole career. Am I right? Okay. Well, he's capable and has been taking care of a lot of different duties in that regard. No, he doesn't get matched up against the other team's top line or anything crazy like that. But you are going to encounter matchups in that role that are going to require more effort than just what you invest in the attacking zone. And I've seen that from him. I believe that Gino has another very good season in him, because I've seen the legs this year. I've seen the burst. And I've also, again, in being around him, gotten the sense that, you know, we all talk about how Sid wants to go out. We all talk about how Sid wants to do this or that or get this done for Sid and whatever. You know, the player who talks to me the most often about wanting to get back into the playoffs and experience that is Gino. He says it in his own way, but he really, really craves that. You want a small story before we go? I was covering a game this was up in Ottawa. It was late last season. And it was when the Penguins were making that surge there. And I shared with him, just playing around here, a story of something that had happened in that visiting locker room in Ottawa back during the 2017 Eastern Conference Final, the one that went to 7 games and Chris Kunitz won in overtime. And it had something to do with Marc-Andre Fleury and Matt Murray. And honestly, I don't even remember what the heck it was, but we're talking. And he laughs a little bit and he looks up at me. He's sitting on the bench and he says, yeah, enough talk about past. We need to get there again. And believe me, that was the end of the conversation. I appreciate the question. I appreciate everybody listening to Daily Shot of Penguins. We'll be back with another one of these tomorrow.